Rabbi Isai, yesterday we saw a Chazon Ish. Now, this Chazon Ish, actually I only showed you, we only learnt, you know what, we should maybe, you know what we'll do something, go back to the Chazon Ish, because I only did one piece of the Chazon Ish with you, right? That piece that we did was the one where he spoke about, where he very clearly disagreed with the Chasam Sofer vis-a-vis Chalav, the Gezeira of Chalav Akum being a Dover Shebeminyan, disagreeing with the Chasam Sofer, the Pshat in Rashi, and saying, and I quote, that if there is Pikuach Memshalti, and they are Tzfuyim Le'oinesh Al Aziyuf, Yesh Mokoim Loimar, there is a Mokoim to say that it's like Shvochois, who are Oimdois Ala Chaleva, and there's a Mirtus. He actually said two things. By the way, for the Lomdus, I want to draw your attention. It's very important when you're learning halacha at the level of a Chazon Ish. You need to be you pay careful attention to what he says, maybe also to what he doesn't say. But he wrote that there is a mokoim loimar because of mirtus, that if there's pikuach memshalti and there is an oynesh for a ziyuf, then he gives two comparisons. It is like shvochos hachovos, like the shvochos employees that are milking the mirtas. There's a mirtas, and also ukeyoshev b'tzad ha'eder, like somebody who is sitting at the side of the eder, and when he stands up, he is able to see what's going on, right? Which the Ramah brings. That is his comparison. Just remember that for when we eventually get to learn Reb Moshe, okay? But there's also a previous paragraph, which I'm going to mention very quickly. We're going to run through it very quickly. Avkat chalav, milk powder, okay? You got the Chazon Ish there? Avkat chalav. The other guys, Avkat chalav.
Yeah.
Let's do the Chazon Ish. The previous paragraph, Avkat chalav. Does everybody have it?
On the left side.
Yeah. Very good. That's it. Avkat chalav, says the Chazon Ish, Eino inyan ligvina v'chema, is unconnected to the Gzeira of Gvina and or of Chema. Nobody minds? Let's keep some, they were all German, but let's just keep some fresh air going. I don't mind making noise. Eino inyan ligvina v'chema. The Gvina nas al yedei hafrashas hamayim min hagush. How do you make cheese? You separate the curds from the whey, right? Chema, how is milk made, butter made by the agitation? Tenuav nidnud shel hacholov, oy al yidei chimum alo eish, v'teva shel inyonim elu eina b'cholov tomei. And the capacity, as we saw in the Gemara, Dova tomei can't make, chema can't make gvina. Aval avkat chalav nas al yidei avir cham v'yovesh. But how is milk powder made? It's made just by drying it out. Hot air and heat, and the moisture is taken out of the milk and you're left with the powder. And this action has got nothing to do with the nature of what you're doing. And therefore he says, there is a chashash, if there is a chashash, you can also dry out camel milk and horse milk, right? And therefore, there is a real problem. Just because something is milk powder, unlike milk which changes its form, he's making a very simple point. Unlike milk which changes its form into cheese or into butter, and then we say that is okay according to many because a dovatome can't be, the milk of a dovatome can't become butter, it can't become cheese. But with avkat chalav, anything can be avkat. Take any item and just take away the moisture and it becomes powder. So the fact that it is now powder, don't say, oh, it's changed its form and therefore it's no longer in the gzeira. Not true. Milk powder should be treated halachically exactly as the same as milk, and therefore should be problematic. Now read the next paragraph, and this is where what I should have done with you, I apologize. Va'omnam. However, there's pikuach memshalti, and they get a ziyuf, da-da-dum, not like the Chasam Sofer, not Dover Shebeminyan. This is the context. That's what I wanted you to understand, that this Chazon Ish that we learnt yesterday had a context.
So is there...
Avkat Chalav. So he was talking, so let me just finish this, it's really, really important. He was talking about using Avkat Chalav. That clearly was what he was discussing, right? So he starts off by saying the first paragraph that the fact that it's in powder form is utterly irrelevant halachically. If this is Chalav Stam, Chalav Akum, then it's also. However,
so that's not milk then.
Absolutely.
It's not milk powder.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, milk powder is exactly the same as milk. He makes that point. But then he says, however, V'omnom, and then everything we learned yesterday. Meaning, what is he saying? That there is to say that he is being makel is a bit... we have to be very careful. Yesh mokoim loymar dehavi kashifcha. There is. It sounds like he's being noted to be being makel. Yesh mokoim loymar. He disagrees with the Chasam Sofer, and he says if there is pikuach memshalti and there is an oynish for the ziyuf, there is a mokoim loymar that it's like somebody yeshu b'tzad ha'eda, which the Ramah is matir or the shifcha, etc. That is the context of the Chazon Ish. What did you want to say? Sorry,
no, just.
Okay.
I still have a question.
Yeah.
So my question is that now to be seen in relation to Avkat Chalav, or since we equate Avkat Chalav and Chalav, this Ve'amnam B'yesh Pikuach part is
that's a very good point.
Be applied across the board.
So I think in the Chazon Ish, at least, we will get to at some point to the opinion of Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank. It's not even in this bundle because it's a separate subtopic. The topic of milk powder per se is not really our sugya. The Chazon Ish very clearly is saying that, very clear, no difference whatsoever. That's the way, his opinion. But the only reason I mentioned it is because you got to see the context. And now I'm going to share. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to see a bunch of achronim post the Chazon Ish, contemporaries and post, who discuss and give us historical background to the context and a fascinating thing of this. And this is what's going to emerge.
One question there. There's also, as far as I understood, the difference between the Avkat Chalav and Gvina in the sense that there is no ma'amid in the powder involved.
Absolutely. He's talking about Chalav. He's talking about Chalav.
But and he says la puke gvina.
Correct.
He says
we're not. He's saying there is no difference. There is no connection, no comparison between Chalav and Gvina and Chema, which may be mutter, because there you cannot make a dover tame. But Avkat Chalav, in other words, he's equating entirely. Avkat Chalav and Chalav are the same. They're totally the same halachically from the perspective of Chalav Akum, which is what he's discussing. Okay? Yeah, okay. That's what he's saying. Yeah. He then goes on to say that maybe it's a bit better because of that. Now let's have a look. We'll do it in the following order. In the order you've got it there, Shevet HaLevi. Rav Vosner in two places, you've got to put arrows. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can't go wrong.
Excuse me, Mechila, so what is the bottom line of the Chazon Ish?
That is the question.
It's not
it's not Davar Shebeminyan. Chalav very clearly was not Davar Shebeminyan. He argues on the Chasam Sofer. That's very clear. The question is, so what was he saying? He said, Yesh mokoim loymar. Those are his exact words. When there's pikuach memshalti, and there is an oynish for ziyuf, Yesh mokoim loymar, it sounds very much like he is being sympathetic to saying that it should be okay. Now let's give you some, and this is very important, I'm digging around in various different svarim, and I've come across the following. Shevet HaLevi, Chelek Dalad, Simon Pei Zayin, Ois, I don't know what. Right? The next thing with the arrow. V'loi ne'elam me'iti. Just go on to the next page. V'loi ne'elam me'iti. Says Rav Vosner. This is Rav Vosner. Yeah? V'loi ne'elam me'iti shehagoyin Chazon Ish b'yerodei Simon Mem Aleph Sivkot Dalad Chelek b'zeh ala Chasam Sofer. He says, don't think that I am not aware of... Let's try and help you out here 1 second. Maybe this is a... So yeah, this is an earlier version. Hold on. That's why it would help if you were able to.
Yeah, because you have almost identical versions.
Correct, but I update them and I make enough copies and I give them out. That's exactly why I do it. Okay, this is the last one. I got Zell. No, I don't have any more. Pasha, I don't have any more. Okay, Velone Elamiti, where the arrow is, says the Rav Wosner. He says, I'm well aware. He's being machmir here. He says, don't worry, I'm not unaware. Shahagoyin Chazon Ish v'yeredesim in Memalef Sif Kotten Daled Choylik B'Zala Chasam Sofer. He argues on the Chasam Sofer Masha Kosev Gzeres Chalav Gzeru Kadmoinis v'Nesra B'Minyan. Gam Etzem Chalav Toir Shel Goy. Chasam Sofer says that milk is a davar shebeminyan, and I don't care nowadays whether there is any real concern about whether there's Chalav Tomei or not. Says the Chasam Sofer, I don't care, it's too late, it's davar shebeminyan. Says the Rav Wosner, I'm well aware that the Chazon Ish argues on the Chasam Sofer. The Chazon Ish maskim la pri chodosh. Very clearly, the Chazon Ish is maskim to the pri chodosh. The ikas michosay shel Chasam Sofer al Rashi avoid the Zorah daf lamed hey. The Ramaschin lefiv apirish pish ba Chasam Sofer al the koi beni atva the koi al cholav toy shel esra b'minyan tomua. Says the Chazon Ish, the Chasam Sofer relies on a pshat in Rashi. Zog the Chazon Ish, the Chasam Sofer is pshat in Rashi tomua. The lo shein Rashi muchacht al cholav tomi koi yuin sham Chazon Ish. So I'm well aware of the Chazon Ish. Hine, asapro lichvoidai. I'm going to tell you. Dilifnei chofhei shonim, 25 years ago, koidem shehidfis ha-Chazon Ish dovozeh. Before the Chazon Ish printed this, sho'al oisi. The Chazon Ish, in his humility, Rav Wosner was a world-class posek, but he wasn't a Chazon Ish. Certainly not 25 years before the Chazon Ish was printed. We could go and work out what year that was. The Shevet HaLevi then was an up-and-coming young posek, no question. But the Chazon Ish, and it was the Mora de Asra, literally the Mora of Eretz Yisrael, the posek. He went and he asked the Shevet HaLevi, who was a Hungarischer, Kiyodua, yeah, he went and asked him, Sha'alaisi, imani maskim sheyachloik ala Chasam Sofer. The Chazon Ish ba'anvasonusai. In his humility, went and asked this younger posek. We could work out the exact years and dates, and I'm actually minded to do it. Go and see what year it was and find out how each of them old were they at the time. It'd be fascinating. Either way, he definitely was a younger and up-and-coming posek, Hungarischer, schooled in, he learnt in Shevet HaLevi, learnt in Yeshivas Chachma Lublin. That was a few famous stories with him and Rav Meir Shapiro. Anyway, that was his Rebbe. So he said, the Chazon Ish asked him, does Reb Shmuel Wosner agree that he should argue with the Chasam Sofer? V'omarti lai, and I, says Reb Wosner, said to him, B'meh hamaduba, and he said, what do you mean? You argue on the Chasam Sofer about what? V'heishivli b'yesoid shitas ha-Chasam Sofer me Rashi anal. And he told me exactly which one it was, this one. V'omarti lai, b'onyi, delu yehei kidvarav shepirish ha-Chasam Sofer b'divrei Rashi tomua. Even if you're right, Chazon Ish, says the young Baal Shevet HaLevi to the Chazon Ish. Let's say that you're right, Pshat in Rashi, that the Chasam Sofer's Pshat in Rashi is shvierig, it's tomua. Mihu, mikol mokem, al yedei zeh adayin osolonu lidches hashitches ha-Chasam Sofer ledina. But he says, I still feel, says the Shevet HaLevi, that it is not up to us. We're not able to push away the opinion of the Chazon Ish ledina. Ubifrat da omra lemigda milsa kenira heita bidvar b'tshuva. Now, especially if you look and you see the Chasam Sofer was trying to be lemigdar milsa to stop a breach in kashrus, and therefore he gave him his opinion. He asked him for his opinion. He gave him his opinion, and that's that. And he ignored it. That is exactly where I was going with this.
Why is he even asking then?
That the Chazon Ish, I'm sure, had a cheshbon. He wanted to hear. I'm not. Who knows? I have no idea. Mitam komos imodo. I don't know. So he asked him, and he ignored it. In another place, the Shevet HaLevi says the same thing over the page in Chelik Vov.
Well, maybe that's
Simon Kuf Yud. Sorry.
Maybe due to that, he just said Yesh Mocha and Roma.
You know what, Ali? That's a very good point. It could be that he did write still Tomua, and he said Yesh Moka, maybe that's why, who knows?
Because also
We don't know, we can speculate.
Also, Rav Vosna, he said, Mikol Mokom, Adif Osulam. It sounds almost like, even though if you were right, even if you were, let's assume you were right,
Yeah.
it would still be, difficult for us, for me and the Ungarische Yidden, etc.
Yeah.
to go against the Chasam Sofer. Better to be Machmi and go with that,
Yeah, and
than
of
to dishonor the psak of the Chasam Sofer. So to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, that is definitely plausible. That is definitely plausible. But Rabbi Sai, when we are dealing in halacha, and you're going to see something really interesting now, in a minute. We can speculate till the cows come home. Yeah?
Are they?
Bring them home.
We can speculate, but we have to go, and you're going to see a very interesting klal in a few minutes. I've got something really interesting here for you. He repeats his words here in the next over the page. Simon Kufiyud. Ukvaher b'shittas Rambam Rabbeinu Pri. I'm b'shuvas Chasam Sofer. Yeah, Hechmer ma'oy neged Pri Chodosh. V'dato lifsay kasayrim decholav nikodovish nigzeba minyan. He brings the Chasam Sofer. Elo shagon Chazon Ish. Hissig Chasam Sofer. Medivrei Pri Chodosh. Avol imein b'chol ha'ir lo chamoyrov lo gamlov lo chazira lo susi lo shamanu lesa v'gam docha ha'chazon ish rayas ha'chasam sofer mikol mokaim. Are you with me? We're on the next page, guys. Yeah,
You
hello.
said Kufyud.
Simon Kufyud, yes.
Where?
They're singing Kufiyud.
Simon Kufyud, next page with the arrow. I can't do much more.
I didn't see the arrow. Sorry.
Yeah, this one.
No, that's
What's
fine.
the arrow
Okay,
next
I'm. Hala's good. Are we good? So I'm actually 2/3 of the way down in that paragraph now. He's just repeating what he said. Yeah. After the Mikol Mokim, end of the line. Mikol Mokim. Kvahoyeli vikuach pe el pe b'chayim chiyusoy imaron hachazon ish b'nidon zeh. I already had an argument while he was alive with the Chazon Ish. He repeats what he told us in the previous tshuva. V'shoal oisi b'an v'sonusoy madati ha'ani obazeh. And he asked me in his humility. Says Rav Vosna, the Chazon Ish asked me in his humility what I feel. V'amarti loy kiven she hero yira dekosav ha'chasam sofer ze lemigda milsa kedas ha'machmirim decholav gam ke nigze b'minyan hagam d'arayas ein ha'machriyas mikol mokim halocha b'zeh kachasam sofer. So again, the Shevet HaLevi is just saying, repeating what we saw before. There's no real big difference, but just same thing. Now we get to go over the page again. Turn the page, guys. Thank you. And we now here have the Chelkas Yaakov. The Chelkas Yaakov was a big posek in Zurich, Rav Breish. Yeah, Ramodche Yaakov Breish, a big posek in Zurich. And he writes as follows. There's an arrow, the bottom left. Yes, it says Simulamed Hey, Hemshech. Got it? Everybody with me?
Yes.
Jolly good. La'acha Kosvi, he writes, after I wrote this, he's writing about Pikuach Memshalah, on the milk, which he's not happy with, blah, blah, blah. Heiruni b'bni Mashol Yichya, who became, his son took over from him in Zurich, became also a posek there. La'ayin b'Chazon Ish. He says, after he wrote this, his son told him, that, Abba, look in the Chazon Ish. Le'inin avkat chalav, sheledatoi, yuchal le'yos gam micholav tomei v'osur. The Chazon Ish writes that milk powder can be made from horse milk as well, and should be also. And then he writes, omnom, da-da-da-da-da-da. Then he quotes the Chazon Ish, turn over the page, because it's just a quote from the Chazon Ish. And then over the next page, there's another arrow.
We got it.
Are you getting the point?
Yes.
Excellent. V'hinei. Sorry. V'hinei.
The good thing it's not on tape.
It is on tape. Of course it is.
That was a joke.
That's the best thing. That's the best thing.
Well, we're friends. Yeah, we can.
I mean, so far.
So far, yeah, for the moment. V'hinei. This is really interesting, guys. There was a big. I don't know how to. If you haven't heard of him, he was a tzaddik that, besides being a posek, a tzaddik, a massive Talmud Chacham of the Shalsheles of Brisk, Reb Moshe Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who lived in Switzerland and was considered to be Das Torah in Europe, but he was very quiet. He was a Goy Notzum and a Pikeach, a Baal Eitzah. Yeah. So Reb Moshe Soloveitchik said as follows: V'hinei, siper li harav going Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, Neched Horach, he's a grandson of Reb Chaim Brisker. Shehu shal Chazon Ish. He himself asked the Chazon Ish, Al zeh, she'omrim olav shehitir Chalav Akum. He said to the Chazon Ish, Reb Moshe Soloveitchik said to the Chazon Ish that they're saying about you that you are matir Chalav Akum. Vehishiv b'zeh haloshen. And the Chazon Ish answered to him and said, Ma oid yomru alai. What else are they going to say about me? B'kor of yomru alai sheni matir chas v'sholem gam eishes ish. The soon they're going to say about me also that I'm just matir and eishes ish. Really? That's what they say about me? That is Rav Braish. Now everybody here in this chain, let's get this clear. Rav Braish is having a conversation with Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, who had a conversation with the Chazon Ish. So I don't think there is any reason to doubt. Not that ever would be, but there we have a clear, yeah. The Chazon Ish said, B'zeh haloshen. What else are they going to say about me? I'm matich Chalav Akum. Soon they're going to say I'm matich eishes ish. V'heir lefonai ish mehemen biyoser. Then says Rav Braish, somebody very trustworthy to him, to Rav Braish, testified, Sheshua Chazon Ish ala shmenet, smetna, yes, on the smetna, the sour cream.
Smetana, nice.
Yeah, yeah. So somebody asked the Chazon Ish about that of Akum. V'osar loy befeirish, and he said it's osur, osur. V'gam heid lefonai oid ish acher mehemen biyoser she'osar b'hoira osay Chalav Akum af lekoton ben hei shonim. And somebody else told Rav Braish that he personally asked the Chazon Ish about whether he could use Chalav Akum for his son who was 5 years old, and the Chazon Ish said no way. Ukanira, says Rav Braish, Ukanira, it would seem, Mashekosav bisvaroi hanal, hu rak b'derech shakle v'taria, ukilashoynoi sham, yesh mokem loima. Right, and he picks up on the fact that in the Sefer Chazon Ish, the Lashon is yesh mokem loima. And therefore, it seems it was shakle v'taria, the Chazon Ish, as you know, if you know the style of his Sefer, it was shakle v'taria in the Sugya. And the truth is, he really hasn't told us anything new. Does any Amo Oretz not know the Pri Chodosh? We all know the Chazon. All he's done is he's quoted the Pri Chodosh, and it's true, he is siding with the Pri Chodosh more than with the Chasam Sofer, but okay, we say that. What's the big deal? We know that. What's he added? V'hasteichemed, he says the steichemed brings a whole long list of opinions that many of them hold that it was an Eser b'minyan and many some hold not. Aval uvda de milsa miyak ein mishayachish. But lemaisa, the facts on the ground, nobody will deny. De midoir doirois b'chol hamakoymos v'af ba'orei Sfarad. That from generations in all places, even in the Svardisha, af ba'orei Sfarad, onu noyhagim La Isur. And on that, the Chasam Sofer wrote that the Kula then becomes a Chumrah, because then you have a Din Neder. Umizelo Noga HaChazon Ish B'Klal B'Sifrei. The Chazon Ish didn't mention this. He wasn't talking about the Neder aspect. You can't, in other words, he's saying, you can't deny the facts. The facts are that on the ground, Klal Yisrael, even in Orei Sfarad, he's saying, did not follow the Pri Chodosh. They followed the Chasam Sofer. That is the reality on the ground. I'm going to add a point to you. I found something interesting. I'm going to send you the Maramok. I only found it last night. The Chacham Tzvi. Where did the Chacham Tzvi live? In Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And the Chacham Tzvi in Amsterdam was ma'amid shoimrim for Chalav. The Asrei da Pri Chodosh.
Right, in the same
city. In the same city.
Right.
100 years later, 150, I've got to find exactly. And they were absolutely in the time of the Chacham Tzvi. So even in Amsterdam, they were makbid on Chalav stam.
So they hold like the Chazon Sofer.
Yeah, on the ground. Those are the facts on the ground,
So
and therefore, like the Chasam Sofer says, it becomes now a concept of a neder. And the Chazon Ish was never talking about that. The Chazon Ish was only talking about who is right. Is it a Dovish B'minyan or not? But he never spoke about the other aspect. So it's a very valid point.
We can't even say anymore Lefi Makom Amsterdam.
Correct. Correct.
I just want to say, I think it's not right to say they hold like the Chasam Sofer, because the whole point of the Rav Braish is saying also is that it has been an ancient minhag widely spread in most communities, and whoever the poskamar who explain it and justify it is important, but that doesn't mean that Amsterdam holds it like the Chasam Sofer. This was
Correct.
before the Chasam
Correct.
Sofer actually, and
It doesn't mean it's a Davar
same.
Shebeminion. It doesn't mean it's a Davar Shebeminion. It means, that's what your point, correct, but it doesn't make a difference for the Neder aspect. Because if they have, or it might, in other words, these are separate issues. If on the ground, Klal Yisrael, if that gets a status of a Neder by virtue of the fact that that's the way Klal Yisrael have behaved, then it could be then it's Peiritz Geder, and it could be a problem of a Neder, which might be Doiraisa, even if it isn't a Davar Shebeminion. Subtle technical point. Eli, you're right.
Even when he says here, this is a Chash Neder Deraisa, so we have to go to Chumrah.
Yeah.
By virtue of knowing that it has been universally accepted
Yes.
in most communities, that's just a fact.
Correct. Then he says something very interesting a bit further. So the next arrow.
Yes.
I was in a very helpful mood, I must say.
Yes. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So the Chazon Ish. Now the Chazon Ish argues on the Chasam Sofer. That's very clear. And then he writes. Rav Breish writes. V'hinei b'mechilas kvoid hagoin after Rav Guvrei leMa'od. It's true. Even though the Chazon Ish was a Gavra Rabba Ma'od, an incredible God, the God Ador, Pesach Ador. Aval gam Chasam Sofer Rav Guvrei Ma'od. But Chasam Sofer was also. Oid midor shel Gaonim muvhakim. He was considered to be a Gaon in the generation of Gaonim. You can't just so easily push away a Chasam Sofer. Especially as the Chasam Sofer is proud of the fact that he saved Rashi from Tosfos' Kasha, etc.
What's that?
Anyway,
Okay.
the point is that Ad Kan, that's what I want to show you from the Rav Breish. And here we come to what I printed out for you today. Right? And here you'll see, because what I want to do is these are comments and quotes from the Heintiger Poskim, as we say, directly on the Chazon Ish. So here we have a Rav Moshe Steinbuch, soll sein gesund, Tshuvas van Hogus, Chelik Aleph, Siman Tov Mem Aleph. Okay? Rav Moshe Steinbuch, Tshuvas van Hogus, and he says as follows.
Where?
Shaila, I had said the new thing I gave out today. Do you have it?
Yes, sir.
Jolly good. Sorry for the lack of arrows. Chayma Issa Chalav Akum.
I'm making an arrow.
You make an arrow. Oh, he's such a tzaddik. Mamash do a yidach chesed. Chayma Issa Chalav Akum. Says Rav Moshe Steinbuch. Yesh Samchin al Rabbeinu HaChazon Ish. Some people rely on the Chazon Ish. Shekosav to b'makom sheyesh pikuach memshala lo la'arv b'cholav minach yesh lahati cholav akum tav kishvachas demir to says. Aval shomati ma'agoyin Rabbi Yisrael Veltz Zatzal shesho al pi Rabbeinu HaChazon Ish Zatzal v'heishiv she'ein dvarav lemaisa klal ela lilodim ktanim o yeledas toich shloshim. So here we have a third oral tradition with all the names. We have a chain of custody. We have Rav Moshe Steinbuch, who hears it from Rabbi Yisrael Veltz, who was a well-known posek, who asked the Chazon Ish himself about what he wrote, and the Chazon Ish said that he was not matir lemaisa, only for Yolodim Ktanim, or Yeledes Toich Shloshim.
But not the kid of the other one.
Ah, very good, Eli. Very good. Wait, we're not done. Eli's has a very good point, because Rav Breish said that somebody told him that he asked the Chazon Ish about a 5-year-old, and he said also. And here we have an oral.
So cotton is until 3 or what?
Ani lo yodea. I'm just. It's interesting.
Well,
Ha'ara.
all lefiha, the
I don't know.
אולי תינוקות שצריכים חלב במקום חלב אם, לא יודע מה, איזה אבקה.
B'diuk lo yodea. Do you see what we're doing here? You see what we're doing here? We're taking a relatively recent Posek Hador, a Chazon Ish, in a very interesting topic, and showing how there can be controversy or disagreement possibly as to what he meant, or I would maybe even say there is no disagreement as to what he meant. There's a bit of a consensus is emerging from, well, Rav Vosner doesn't really help us, to be honest, in this. Rav Vosner just says that the Chazon Ish spoke to him about it. But in terms of what the Chazon Ish meant, and wait, we're not done yet. But so there we have Rav Moshe Steinbuch. We have some another oral history a backstory. Let's go through the next bit because it's really, really good for your ideas anyway. V'yedum divrei Rabbeinu Hagra b'inyan mayim achronim shechazal lo gilu elo hatam aposhut. Famous gone about mayim achronim. Chazal, because some people don't do it because we had Melech Sodomis, doesn't apply anymore. So the Yekkers very famously don't do mayim achronim. The Gra was very against that. He said, absolutely, you have to. Shechazal lo gilu elo hatam aposhut. Aval yesh la takonisayim tamim noisofim. V'gam kan b'cholav akum mekubal. There is a Kabbalah, and do you know who talks about this? Aruch HaShulchan. Oh, he says it a bit later. In fact, we should really do the Aruch HaShulchan. Ela kanira gam kedei lahavdil esanum akum al yenom gozru af benegia b'cholov gozru shetzarich shmira v'chein hevi agoyin akuda shrebchaim mitzanz b'shem chama v'baruch tam shekabbalah biyodai ish mipi ish shezeu takona keduma v'loi rak mehatam shepirtu shumishum chashash cholav tomei v'chach kosav ba'aruch hashulchan shekach mekubel migdoilei hadairis v'ayin sham maisa noira me'inyan zeh. We should really do the maisa. The Aruch HaShulchan brings an incredibly frightening story about Chalav Akum. V'yesh lahakpid ma'od al issa Chalav Akum. Admir Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Melubavitch zatzal Kabbalah b'yodei sheha hashoysa Chalav Akum poigem etzlei be'emunah. So the Rebbe Riatz said, v'avois avoiseinu hikpidum oid mitam komot dai bezel leheir le'elu shetiru kan u'moisrim hechshel mitzrachim gam im Chalav Akum sheyesh pikuach memshalti aval belav hoche hete ze ein boi mamash hayoim. Because even if you would find now this is here we're getting already into another sugya. I'll just quickly do it. Even if you would find them, they'll give them a small fine, says Rav Moshe Steinbuch, and therefore they're not really properly mirtas. Just remember that when we come to Rav Moshe. Okay? V'hashoisim, those who drink, last paragraph, those today,
I'm not sure I understood this.
he says, the idea, the concept.
What does Malzum she say?
There are people who give a hechsher on things because on the basis of pikuach memshalti, but really, this is not something lemaisa, because even if they would find some cholav tomei, he says they would get a very small fine. It's not enough. If they weigh it up against the profits they stand to make, against a small fine, he says today it wouldn't even be considered a mirtas. And I'm going to give you some more data on that as we move on. That last paragraph, right? Those who drink milk on the basis of pikuach memshalti today, they're missing yiras shamayim. They finished. Okay, now let's go to final. Well, nearly final, because there's one more thing I want to do on this.
זה לא קשה קצת מחילה, זה לא קשה קצת על פרי חדש, רבנו תם.
חולק, מחלקת.
כן.
כן, חולק, ברור. Now this is a letter from the Stipler. You've all heard of the Stipler, I hope, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's father. Yes, sorry. Okay. Kreina de Igris Chelek Beis, Michtav Kuf Chaf Gimel.
רגע, שנייה, איפה זה?
Next page. Kraina de Igrita. These are the letters, Michtavim and Shuvot of the Stipler. Gone. Bidvar Cholav Nochri. Tov Shin Chav Zayin. 1967. Okay? So he writes, he doesn't say who it's to. Let's go through it. Achad Rishas Shloim Kved Teirose B'chol HaKoved Michtav Kved Teirose Yigian Ezek Shnei Shvuos. I got your letter 2 weeks ago and I was in a difficult situation, therefore I was unable to do halacha lemaisa. U'ma'oid mefached ani mehoira lemaisa. Says the Stipler, I'm very scared of giving real psak halacha lemaisa. U'b'sheila protis, and to a personal shaila, sometimes I give in if there is a real need. Aval b'sheila klolis. But with a general shaila that's being posed, she'im chas v'sholem et'eh yeheze michshel l'rabim harbe pa'omim ein mispar hinani miyirei hoira ma'oid. When it comes to a general shaila, which is negea to public policy and practice, I am very, very, very scared, and I generally don't like to say anything. Umikivan shemikomokem mechuivani muchach lahoshev lekvei terasa eze milin, but I feel obligated nonetheless to respond a few words. So I will write echtev mashematzosi ba'oni aval loy halacha lemaisa. I will write back to you what I found, but this is not halacha lemaisa. And v'im gam kvei terasa miyirei hoirav or it's a davka heira me'od rav. And if And if you want some to go and ask somebody else after what I've written, with the greatest of pleasure. There are many Gedolei Horah in America, as they say, the Satmar Rebbe and Reb Moshe Feinstein, etc. Says the Steipler, there are big. Don't forget the Satmar Rebbe. We should. The Rabbi Yoel Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Livracha is known perhaps best for his anti-Zionist stance. He was a goyin otzum, a kodesh v'toir, a goyin benigla benista. He didn't stop learning. He was first and foremost a boki b'shas u'poskim, and people tend sometimes to forget whether you are wherever you stand or your Messiah is on the whole Zionist thing. The Steipler in 1967 is saying you want to ask really from the Gedolei Horah. He mentions in the same breath, go to America and ask the Satmarov and Reb Moshe, and he puts the Satmarov before Reb Moshe. Just to give you some sort of context. Never forget that. Bidvar hacholov. Oh, now here we come lemaisa. Bidvar hacholov eineni mevin lefum riyata. I don't understand about this milk shaila that you're asking, because why should there be no benefit for somebody to switch the milk? Because when you add a bit of cholov tomei, then you get more. And of course you sell milk based on how much you're selling. So why should there not be an incentive to do so? You're going to tell me nowadays we don't milk horses and pigs? True. But that doesn't seem to make much of a difference nowadays. אם יש פיקוח הממשלה באופן שזה המויכה בחזקס חולף בהימות תוירה, אם יזברש עירב שם חולף תומי ישחייב עונש גדול, my emphasis, יש צדודין לודון בזה להתירה. It is true that if there is pikuach memshala and he stands to have a severe financial penalty, then יש צדודין לודון בזה. It like echoes of the Chazon Ish, yes, mokoim loimar. You hear that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now here's interesting.
Wasn't he his brother-in-law also?
Yeah. V'uvda yodana. I'll tell you a story. I know of a story. Shebizman ha-milchama. Which milchama? Okay, it's probably Second World War. Shebizman ha-milchama sheloi hoya motzui chalav. When you couldn't get hold of milk. What did they use in the Second World War in Eretz Yisrael? What were they using? Milk powder. V'hekel Morana Chazon Ish Zatzal lechalushim mibnei hayeshiva. The Chazon Ish allowed the weak bochrim leishtamesh bozeh machmas pikuach hamemshala. Now we finally get the context, Rabbi Isai.
Oh, yeah.
The Heilige Steipler, the brother-in-law of the Chazon Ish, tells us exactly what he was writing. What was the case? This was the Second World War in Eretz Yisrael. You couldn't get hold of fresh milk. They could get hold of only avkat chalav. And there were bochrim in the yeshiva that were weak and needed milk. So it's not ktanim. No. Number one, what do we see, Rabbi Isai? This was not a shakla v'taria as was written. That is incorrect. It was lemaisa. It was lemaisa.
But which context?
But we have the context.
Do we know if that's dated, this tshuva?
Who?
This tshuva wasn't dated also, right?
Which tshuva?
Of the Chazon Ish.
None of it is, very rare that anything is dated.
ברוך השם שיש את הפרי חדש, זה לפי השיטה.
ברוך השם שיש את הסטייפלר. שאנחנו יודעים מה ההקשר. Now we know number one, that it was lemaisa. He used it lemaisa. It wasn't just a shaklivatari in the sugya. But what's the context? Second World War, milk powder. Now the milk powder aspect is utterly irrelevant. Remember, the fact that it was powder doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's almost irrelevant. But it was for chalushim ibnei hayeshiva leishtamish b'zeh machmas pikuach hamemshala. Now, how good do you think the pikuach of the memshala was in the Second World War? In the middle of a war in British mandate. Okay. V'hu al pi hashitas ha'pri chodesh. V'hadvorim nidfasu ke'ez ma'chazon ish yerdei simen mem aleph. V'hu mechazon ish alav v'idazor simen dalet. U'betziruf devrei malas kvei teirosoi shebizmanenu bimkoimoi ein shum mokoim hano el achilufenu b'tzuraf pikuach ha'memshala. So the shaila that he was asked, that in a situation where there's nothing to be gained by changing, and there is pikuach memshala, says the Stipler, because it would have seemed to me that Rabbonim would be made matir. Im ein pikuach memshalti, ulai yitochen shebala mechleva yitin is chayvus b'ksav shel ya'ariv shum chay. Maybe, and then he gives him an eitzah. If there is no mamash pikuach memshala, maybe you could get a written obligation from the owner of the farm that he undertakes in writing not to put in any milk. And then it becomes a civil matter if he breaks the contract, and he would get financial penalties, and then it would be doimel heter shvachos.
So what does it mean by there's no hana lechufin?
He gains nothing by switching. There's no incentive for the goy to change milk.
Speaking about the producer.
Correct. Then he goes on. Just a second. I think the next bit, Bidvar HaChevra, I don't know whether that is so much Noigeya. No, the next bit is a different Shaila. That's all we need.
Okay.
So, he gives us context to the Chazon Ish, which is very interesting. Weak Bochrim, at a time when there was no milk, the Chazon Ish relied halacha l'maisa for Bochrim that needed milk, so they were not ketanim. Bochrim in the yeshiva needed milk, there was no other milk available, he relied on pikuach memshala l'maisa.
Because you can't drink the coffee without the milk.
Because they need milk.
Because
They need
it's
milk.
not about-
Calcium. It's not about. Well, I'm sure it wasn't about coffee. It was about. They needed milk. They needed the calcium, the iron, whatever it is. I imagine. And therefore, he says. Therefore, using that to a shoyel. Many years later, 1967, he's saying that if there is tziruf pikuach memshala, if you are in a place that there is no incentive for the goy to switch, plus there is pikuach memshala, he writes, quote, "Kimeduma sherabonim hoyu matirin bekazeh." It would seem to me that Rabbonim would be mekel. So this is an answer quite lemaisa.
But in the time of milchama, yeah? In the time that...
No.
There's nothing to do with the milchama?
Odapam. Let me say it again. Maybe I wasn't clear. The Stipler is being asked, Tafshin Chav Zayin. There's no milchama. He is going back, he's referencing the Chazon Ish, what he paskened at the Zman of milchama. He is then answering the Shaila now, he's being asked in 1967, as follows. Showing that you can rely, the Chazon Ish was prepared to rely on Pikuach Memshala when there is no other options, let's say. Mimela, he says, so if what you're telling me, the Shail in 1967, that there is Pikuach Memshala, then Kemeduma Rabbonim would be mattered.
אבל לא צריך לצרף גם את העניין שהיה זמן קשה, שהיה זמן מלחמה?
אולי?
גם כי רשום עובדה ידענה, שבזמן המלחמה, אז אולי גם את זה צריך לצרף, שהיה זמן
אבל הוא לא כותב את זה.
But there was...
Sorry. I'm not sure we're not understanding each other. הוא נשאל שאלה תופשין ח"ז. הוא משתמש בחזון איש שהיה מלחמה והיה, אבל הוא סומך על הפיקוח בממשלה כשיש איזושהי קושי. על זה פוסק הסטייפלר בתופשין ח"ז, אפילו, כן, יותר ברור?
I'd like to point out that in 1967 was the Six-Day War.
But he doesn't say that. First of all, we'd have to look at the dates. He doesn't say that it's. He doesn't mention it. I don't think that's right to say it. Rega. Now, final point, Rabbi Yisai, because I want to finish here. Final point. We have some interesting. Now we need to go away and reflect on what really happened. We now know from his brother-in-law, impeccable pedigree, exactly the context. We know that at least one of the things that were written about him, that it was only Shakla V'Tar and it wasn't Lemaisa, is incorrect. We know that's incorrect. Mm-hmm. So now what we have is, we have something in writing and we have oral tradition. Let's do something a bit naughty or a bit good. Let's see what the Chazon Ish says about when something is written in a sefer and there's an oral tradition which goes against it, which one you rely on. Let's see a Chazon Ish. Here's the last thing in your bundle. Chazon Ish is in Kuntras HaShiurim. Here. Kuntras HaShiurim. And I put an arrow. Look how good I am. Do you have it? The last page in your bundle. Oh, sorry, it's not the last page. It's after the Chelkas Yaakov. Sorry, it's before we do the Rav Moshe, because that's going to be tomorrow. After the next page after the Chelkas Yaakov is another Chazon Ish. Do you have it?
There's also Kuntras Hashiurim, no?
Kuntras Hashiurim.
Yeah.
The other one was not. The other one was in Yeridea.
Yeah.
Correct. Ubenoi de Behuda. So this is the Chazon Ish wrote a very famous Kuntras all about the Shiurim, the Chazon Ish, his Shiurim on the Tefach and Amor, that somewhere totally different. It's Kuntras Hashiurim. About Shiurim. And he writes as follows. Ubenoi de Behuda tinyona Yeridea, Kosav, de ein eid echod ne'emon loimar, sheploini hagoin Kosav loi, shechoza boi mima shehitir, acharei shehagoin loi pirsum chazorosoi, kedin eid echod neged dova hamuchzik beheta, v'hadova muter kemoi shehoya. The Noda B'Yehuda writes, an eid echod is not ne'eman to say that a gon wrote something and then changed his mind. If I have a clash, a contradiction between what a goin wrote and published, and then an Eid Echad who comes and tells me that he said something else, says the Noda B'Yehuda, you follow what he wrote and not what is said afterwards. On the basis of that, and of course, there is no question. Let's be very, very clear for the record. Hagoyin Tzaddik, Rav Moshe Soloveitchik, Tzaddik V'Kodesh Livrocha, and others. There's no question of him having anything less than an utterly impeccable integrity. But how to use it and how to view the opinion of the Chazon Ish moving forward, we can do no better than looking at the Chazon Ish himself, who quotes the Noda B'Yehuda, who tells us that when you have something biksav, and we have to be careful not to expand more than it says biksav. It says yesh makom loimar. We have the Stipler who tells us that that was the context. Then it would seem we know that the Chazon Ish used pikuach memshala halacha lemaisa in difficult circumstances, and that would appear to be the opinion of the Chazon Ish. And we'll leave that there for today.